By the 4th century BC, the Greek world had been exhausted by generations of war. Athens, Sparta, and Thebes had spent decades locked in a struggle for supremacy, while in the north a new power was rising. Macedonia was a poor kingdom on the edge of the Greek world, yet it was Macedonia that would break the power of Athens and Sparta and bring all of Greece under its rule. It was here that an army was forged which, under the leadership of Alexander the Great, would sweep across continents, shatter the Persian Empire, and march to the very borders of India. But how did a kingdom that many Greeks regarded as semi-barbarian become the most feared military power of the ancient world? This is the story of the rise of Macedonia. In the 5th century BC, the Greco-Persian Wars erupted, a true clash of David and Goliath. The Greek city-states stood against the vast Persian Empire, stretching from the shores of the Bosphorus to the distant lands of India. In 490 BC, King Darius the Great attempted to land near Athens, but the united Greek forces met him at Marathon and drove the Persians back. In 480 BC, King Xerxes I crossed the Hellespont and advanced south with a massive army. He broke through the desperate stand of the Spartans at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, then swept into Attica and burned Athens to the ground. But the tide soon turned. At Salamis, the Greek fleets shattered Persian naval power, and then at Plataea, the united Greek army dealt the final blow. The Persians were forced to withdraw, and Greece remained free. As so often happens, once the common enemy was defeated, the alliance began to fracture. Old rivalries resurfaced, and for nearly a century, Hellas was consumed by civil war, as two great powers, Athens and Sparta, struggled for dominance over Greece. At first, Athens held the advantage. It led the Delian League and commanded the strongest fleet in the Greek world, but ambition proved costly. A bold expedition to Sicily ended in catastrophe, shattering Athenian power. Weakened and unable to recover, Athens was eventually brought down by Sparta in the Peloponnesian War. Yet Spartan supremacy was short-lived. At Leuctra, their army was broken by the Thebans. Thebes rose to power, but only briefly. By the middle of the 4th century BC, the great city-states of Greece were exhausted, drained by decades of conflict, and locked in endless internal strife. At the time, Macedonia stood on the fringes of the Greek world. During the Greco-Persian Wars, it had sided with Persia, even serving as a base for Persian operations in Greece. To the Greeks, it was a distant and backward land, sparsely urbanized, its people regarded as almost barbaric. And yet, the Macedonians spoke a Greek dialect and worshipped the same gods. The kingdom lived under constant threat. To the west and north, Illyrians and Thracians pressed against its borders. In 359 BC, King Perdiccas III marched against the Illyrians and was killed in battle, along with 4,000 of his men. In the aftermath, his younger brother Philip, just 23 years old, took the throne. He inherited a kingdom on the brink of collapse. The army was shattered. Enemies closed in from every direction. The Illyrians, emboldened by victory, advanced from the west. The Paeonians raided from the north, and inside Macedonia, rivals fought for the crown. The Thracians backed Pausanias. Athens sent 3,000 troops to support another claimant, Argaeus. The kingdom stood on the edge of disaster. Philip moved with speed and precision. He sent rich gifts to the Paeonians and Thracians, securing his northern and eastern frontiers and stripping Pausanias of support. Only Athens remained. They sought to regain Amphipolis, a wealthy city in eastern Macedonia, once their colony rich in silver. Philip made a calculated move. He withdrew Macedonian forces and granted the city its independence. Athens was satisfied. Their support for Argaeus vanished. In a matter of months, Philip reduced his enemies from 4 to 1. Then he turned west, defeated the Illyrians, and secured an alliance through marriage to the Epirot princess Olympias. In 356 BC, she gave birth to a son, Alexander. With his borders stabilized, Philip understood a deeper truth. Macedonia had survived the crisis, but it remained vulnerable. If the kingdom was to endure, it had to change. So began his military reforms. The disorganized army he inherited had become the strongest force in all of Greece. Philip began with recruitment. Drawing on the Theban model, he divided Macedonia into military districts, each responsible for supplying men to the royal army. What had once been a seasonal militia, assembled for campaigns and dismissed in peacetime, was transformed into a standing professional force. Its ranks grew, its discipline hardened, and its training became consistent. His most decisive innovation was the sarissa, a pike 4 to 6 meters long, twice the length of a Greek spear. An iron tip at one end, a bronze counterweight at the other. It required both hands to wield, forcing the shield to be slung from the shoulder. Men armed with sarissas fought in dense formation, the Macedonian phalanx. When the front ranks lowered their pikes, a forest of spear points surged forward, projecting far beyond the line. For any opponent armed with a short sword or a conventional spear, breaking through that wall was almost impossible. Philip did not stop with the infantry. He reshaped the cavalry as well. The hetairoi, the companions, were the elite horsemen of Macedonia, drawn from the nobility and bound to the king. Philip forged them into a disciplined striking force, opening their ranks not only to Macedonian aristocrats, but to also warriors from Thessaly and other Greek lands. From this, he developed a new way of war, the hammer and anvil. The phalanx fixed the enemy in place, locking their infantry in a deadly standstill, and the cavalry struck, fast, concentrated, aimed at the weakest point, breaking the enemy line from the flank or the rear. His reforms reached beyond the battlefield. Philip also tightened the army's logistics. Soldiers were no longer allowed to bring their families on campaign. Servants were strictly limited. A noble Macedonian could only take one. Each man carried his own gear and lived off the land. The result was an army unlike any Greece had seen. Larger, harder, faster, and far more flexible. Creating and maintaining a professional army demanded vast resources, and Philip turned once more to Amphipolis, the city he earlier relinquished. By taking it back, he secured access to its rich silver mines. This move heightened tensions with Athens, but it did not immediately lead to open war. Athens commanded a powerful fleet, yet its land forces were not strong enough to challenge Macedonia on its own ground. At the same time, the city was already entangled in the costly social war, fighting former allies of the Second Athenian League. The conflict drained its treasury and tied down its navy. In the end, Athens responded to the loss of Amphipolis with little more than protests and a formal declaration of war. A year later, Philip seized Cranides and renamed it Philippi, gaining control over the gold mines of Mount Pangaeus. These mines brought in around 1,000 talents of gold each year, enough to sustain his army and build reserves. He then moved against Methone, the last independent Greek city on the Macedonian coast and an ally of Athens. Though it held no gold, Methone was a strategic foothold, a potential gateway for invasion. Philip was determined to remove it. During the siege, he was struck in the face by an arrow and lost an eye. From there, Philip turned toward Thessaly. He intervened in local conflicts, backing the Thessalian League in its struggle against the tyrants of Pherae. After defeating their Phocian allies, Philip was elected Archon of the Thessalian League. This gave him command over the famed Thessalian cavalry, a powerful addition that would become the striking arm of his forces. It also drew him deeper into the politics of the Greek world. In 352, Philip attempted to push south through Thermopylae, but this time the Athenians acted swiftly, blocking his advance. It was one of the rare moments where they moved with speed and unity. Afterward, Philip expanded steadily into Thrace, subduing local rulers until he reached the Straits of the Black Sea, the vital route through which grain flowed to Athens. By now, the Greeks began to grasp the scale of the threat. The Athenian orator Demosthenes delivered a series of fierce speeches, the Philippics, warning of Philip's ambitions and calling for resistance. In 346 BC, despite years of tension, Athens and Macedonia concluded a peace. Athens recognized Philip's northern conquests, and Amphipolis remained beyond its control. For Philip, it was a major diplomatic victory. But the peace proved fragile. By 340 BC, Philip laid siege to Perinthus in Byzantium, cities crucial to Athens' grain supply. Athens responded by sending ships loaded with grain to aid the defenders. Philip intercepted them, and the conflict flared up once more. In 339 BC, Philip finally passed through Thermopylae and seized Elatic, a key position on the road to Boeotia and Attica. The news struck Athens like a shock. Panic spread through the assembly, as Demosthenes would later recall. At this decisive moment, Demosthenes achieved the greatest diplomatic success of his career, forging an alliance between Athens and Thebes. Longtime rivals, they now stood together against a common enemy. In 338 BC, the combined forces of Athens and Thebes took up position near the city of Chaeronea, determined to block Philip's advance south. They chose their ground carefully. A marshy plain stretching for several kilometers seemed to limit the effectiveness of Macedonian cavalry. By forcing Philip to extend his line, they hoped to weaken the Macedonian phalanx, a formation that depended on depth and cohesion. The allied army was commanded by several strategoi, Charis, Lysicles, and Stratocles for Athens, and Theagenes for Thebes. Opposing them stood Philip, alongside his son Alexander, already beginning to show the qualities of a commander. On his left, anchored against the hills, stood the Athenians, around 6,000 citizens supported by 2,000 mercenaries. The center was held by contingents from allied cities. On the right, near the river, stood the Thebans. At the very edge of the line stood their finest soldiers, the Sacred Band, 300 elite warriors. In total, the allies fielded around 30,000 men. Philip's army matched them in number. Macedonian phalangites supported by 2,000 companion cavalry. Alexander commanded the left wing, guided by experienced generals, Parmenion and Antipater, while Philip himself took command of the right. He deployed his army at an angle to the Greek line and ordered the advance. The Macedonian right struck first. Philip's veterans pressed hard against the Athenians, then, on command, began to give ground in a controlled withdrawal. Step by step, they fell back, maintaining order. It was a trap. Instead of holding formation with their allies, the Athenians surged forward, pursuing the retreating Macedonians. Stratocles is said to have urged them on, calling to drive the enemy all the way back to Macedonia. They advanced too far. As the Athenian line pushed ahead, a gap opened between them and the rest of the allied army. At that moment, the battle reached its turning point. On the Macedonian left, Alexander led his troops into the fight. Seeing the opening, he drove forward, breaking through the weakened line. The companion cavalry followed, pouring through the gap and striking deep into the allied formation. At the same time, Philip gave the signal. His right wing halted its retreat and surged forward. The Athenians, exhausted from the pursuit, could not hold. Their line collapsed. What began as an advance turned into a rout. Across the field, the allied army broke and fled. Only one force stood its ground, however, the Theban Sacred Band. Surrounded and outmatched, they fought where they stood and fell to the last man. The battle was over. With victory at Chaeronea, Philip became the master of Greece. Thebes was humbled, its power broken, a Macedonian garrison placed within its walls. The cities of Boeotia were declared free. Yet toward Athens, Philip showed restraint. The prisoners were released without ransom. The city was spared occupation. Athens remained independent for now. Philip's unexpected leniency towards Athens was no accident. He was already looking beyond Greece, toward a greater war. Instead of destroying his former enemies, he chose to turn them into allies. For the Greeks, Persia remained the ancient adversary. For generations, the Persian kings had interfered in Greek affairs, bribing politicians, fueling rivalries, turning city against city. The memory of Athens in flames had never fully faded, and for a century and a half, the desire for retribution lingered. Philip intended to awaken it. And the moment was right. The Persian Empire was no longer the power that it had once been. Court intrigues and palace coups weakened its core. Its armies no longer inspired the same fear. In 337 BC, Philip summoned representatives of nearly all the Greek city-states to Corinth. Only Sparta refused to attend. There, the Greeks formed a new alliance, the Corinthian League. Its purpose was clear: to secure peace within Greece and to unite its strength against a common enemy. The autonomy of each city was guaranteed. War between members was forbidden. Together, they would wage a single war abroad. At the head of the league stood its hegemon, Philip himself. In name, it was a union of independent states, but in reality, power rested in Philip's hands. With Greece under his control, he turned to the final objective, Persia. In the spring of 336 BC, he dispatched an advance force of 10,000 men to Asia Minor. Their task was to secure a foothold, encourage uprisings among the Greek cities of the coast, and prepare the way for the main army. The timing could not have been better. Another coup had shaken the Persian court, and the new king Darius III had yet to consolidate his rule. Several cities submitted with little resistance. The war had begun, but Philip would not live to see it through. In 336 BC, Philip arranged the marriage of his daughter Cleopatra to Alexander, king of Epirus. The celebration stretched over several days: banquets, sacrifices, athletic contests, followed by more feasting. Philip turned the wedding into a display of power. Guests gathered from across the Greek world. It was meant to impress, to signal what was coming. On the morning of yet another banquet, a ceremonial procession was to begin. But before it could start, and in full view of the assembled crowd, Philip's own bodyguard, Pausanias, stepped forward and drove a dagger into his side. Philip fell dead on the spot. The assassin tried to escape, but he was cut down almost immediately. No interrogation, no answers, and in that moment, the truth behind the killing was buried with him. What followed was speculation. Some saw it as an act of personal revenge. Others suspected a deeper conspiracy, pointing to Olympias, Alexander's mother, or even to Alexander himself. Not long before the assassination, a public quarrel had erupted between father and son, ending with Alexander's exile from the court. There are also theories of Persian involvement, a motive they certainly had. But certainty is out of reach. The truth of Philip's murder remains unknown. On the very day of Philip's death, the army and the Macedonian nobility proclaimed a new king, the 20-year-old Alexander, son of Philip and Olympias. He moved without hesitation. Any potential rivals were swiftly eliminated. Philip's death sent shockwaves through Greece. Many believed Macedonian dominance had come to an end. When uprisings broke out, Alexander responded at once. He marched south, passed through Thessaly and Thermopylae, and reached Corinth before the Greek cities could unite. There, the Corinthian Congress confirmed his authority and entrusted him with the campaign against Persia. But before turning east, Alexander secured his rear. He launched a rapid campaign to the north and defeated Thracians once again. Then he crossed the Danube. In the west, he crushed the Illyrians, and in a few months, he proved himself not only king, but commander. Then came the test. While Alexander campaigned in the north, rumors spread that he had been killed. Thebes rose in revolt. Alexander turned back immediately. He marched with speed, reached the city before help could arrive, and took it by force. The punishment was absolute. Thebes was destroyed. Its people were sold into slavery, and that message was clear. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed into Asia. If you made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations and history. If you'd like to support the channel, join our Patreon or become a YouTube channel member. You get early access to new episodes, behind-the-scenes looks, and more. You can also leave a super thanks below to give us a little extra boost. If you want to listen to history on the go, check out our all-new podcast, Parabellum History. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.